The war in Ukraine entered July with a strange mix of signals coming from every direction at once. One of the more understated but genuinely notable stories to come out of the Donetsk region this week involved operators from the 8th Regiment of Ukraine's Special Operations Forces. Rather than a straightforward firefight, the operation played out almost like a hostage negotiation under fire. The Special Purpose Group approached an occupied Russian position and, before opening up with weapons, gave the Russian servicemen there a chance to surrender peacefully. Some soldiers refused that kind of offer out of fear, discipline, or simple disbelief that it's genuine, and that's apparently what happened here. The Russians on that position turned down the offer to lay down arms. Only after that refusal did the Ukrainian operators move to direct action. When the dust settled, one Russian serviceman was dead, and 2 more had changed their minds and surrendered. What happened next is arguably just as important as the assault itself. The Ukrainian team didn't just take the prisoners and leave. They gave the 2 captured men whatever medical or logistical assistance they needed on the spot, then successfully pulled them out of the area, no small task when you're moving captives through contested territory.
Спокойно лежим. Спокойно лежим.
Второй бат, вторая рота. Второй бат, вторая рота всего. 34-я бригада.
А где дальше позиция?
While that raid was unfolding in Donetsk, intelligence reporting out of the south painted a more worrying picture. According to Ukrainian military sources, Russian command has decided to increase the number of units it keeps stationed in the area around what used to be the Kakhovka Reservoir, the massive body of water that disappeared after the dam supplying it was destroyed back in 2023. The area has been a strange kind of no man's land ever since, part swamp, part open field, and apparently now becoming a staging ground again. The buildup isn't just about raw troop numbers. Reports indicate Russia is putting particular emphasis on unmanned aerial vehicle units and special forces detachments in this specific area, alongside a general uptick in reconnaissance activity. That combination, more drones, more scouts, more elite infantry, tends to precede offensive action rather than defensive consolidation, and Ukrainian officials seem to be reading it that way too. According to Voloshin, a spokesperson referenced in the reporting, the next Russian push looks to be aimed squarely at the right bank part of the Zaporizhzhia region. Specifically, the settlement of Zelenskyy and a handful of other communities on that side of the river are described as likely targets, with Russian planners reportedly intent on causing as much destruction there as they can manage. For residents of these communities, many of whom have already lived through years of frontline proximity, the warning signs point toward another difficult stretch ahead. DeepState, the open-source mapping project that's become one of the more trusted trackers of Frontline movement, published its assessment of June's territorial changes. Russian occupation forces captured 84 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory over the course of the month. That's not a small number in absolute terms, but when Ukrainian counterattacks and the territory Kyiv's forces managed to reclaim are factored into the equation, the overall net balance for Russia came out negative for the second consecutive month. Analysts working with DeepState were careful to note that for operational security reasons, they can't get into specifics about where and how Ukrainian forces made their gains. But they did share that the gap between what Russia lost and what it gained back was narrow, not the kind of decisive swing that would suggest a major shift in the war's trajectory, but a swing nonetheless. One trend that did stand out was a continued increase in the sheer number of Russian assault actions, up 4.4% compared to the previous month. DeepState's analysts were quick to push back on the idea that more assaults automatically mean more effectiveness. If anything, the pattern reads as the opposite. Individual Russian soldiers are still being sent forward in what often look like poorly justified high-casualty pushes, and the reasoning behind sending a single man on what amounts to a suicidal advance remains, in the analyst's own words, an open question. Where Russia did see tactical successes in June was concentrated in 3 areas near Kostiantynivka, along stretches of the Ukrainian state border, and around Huliaipole. Those gains were enough to modestly improve Russia's overall position compared to how May had gone. Not every piece of frontline footage this week came from Ukrainian sources. A Russian soldier can be seen filming his own convoy on the Donetsk direction, apparently unaware or perhaps aware but unable to do anything about it that a Ukrainian first-person view drone was inbound. The video captures the drone flying directly into the group of vehicles and the immediate visceral reaction from the Russian soldier holding the camera afterward. These kinds of first-person clips have become almost a genre unto themselves in this war, offering a rare, unfiltered look at what it's actually like to be on the receiving end of the drone warfare that now defines so much of the fighting.
Меня задело, блядь! А? Давай это! Так дальше меня, так!
If there was one story this week that cut through everything else, it was the attack on Kyiv in the early hours of July 2. Russia launched what can only be described as a maximalist combined strike, more than 70 missiles of various types, nearly half of them ballistic, alongside close to 500 attack drones, a category that included the newer jet-powered variants of the Shahed loitering munition. The bulk of that firepower was aimed directly at the capital. Ukraine's air defense network did what it could and by most accounts intercepted a significant share of the incoming threats. But with a barrage of that scale, complete interception was never realistic, and the parts that got through did real damage. Explosions rang out across Kyiv for hours as air defense units continued engaging targets overhead. By the time officials had a chance to compile confirmed figures, the toll stood at a minimum of 13 people killed and more than 80 injured, including 2 children. More than 20 residential buildings and other pieces of civilian infrastructure sustained damage. In several of the hardest-hit districts, rescue teams were still working through the rubble well after the attack, with the real possibility that people remained trapped. The strikes also set off numerous fires, partially collapsed some high-rise residential buildings, and tore into transport and utility infrastructure badly enough that the city had to temporarily reroute its public transit system. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressed the attack directly, framing air defense supply as nothing less than an absolute priority for Ukraine right now. He pointed to the PURL program specifically as a mechanism that translates directly into lives saved and thanked the international partners who continue to contribute to it, describing every bilateral air defense agreement Ukraine has signed as making a real, tangible difference. But the centerpiece of his statement was a pointed appeal to Washington. Zelenskyy said Ukraine is counting heavily on a U.S. decision regarding licensing for Patriot air defense systems alongside other joint production efforts, describing that combination as one of the few things that could actually put a stop to attacks like the one Kyiv had just endured. Away from the capital, the fighting around Pokrovsk continued to be defined by exactly the kind of grinding, attritional combat that's characterized this sector for well over a year now. Russian forces kept pushing forward using small infantry groups, a tactic that trades individual soldiers' safety for the chance of finding gaps in Ukrainian lines, while simultaneously working to build up the manpower and equipment needed to sustain the effort. The Coordination Center, operating under the 7th Rapid Reaction Corps of Ukraine's airborne forces, reported that its work throughout June significantly blunted those Russian efforts. Between June 1 and June 30, the center's operations were credited with killing or wounding 1,700 Russian occupiers, a figure that, if accurate, represents a substantial monthly toll even by the standards of this particularly bloody sector. Beyond personnel losses, Ukrainian forces in the area also reported destroying 71 pieces of Russian artillery and armored vehicles, 139 trucks and passenger cars used for logistics and troop transport, 54 quad bikes and motorbikes. Vehicles Russian units have increasingly relied on to move small groups of infantry across contested ground where larger vehicles would be immediately spotted and destroyed, and 1,151 individual enemy positions. That last figure is worth sitting with for a moment. Over 1,100 positions destroyed in a single month in a single sector gives some sense of just how dense and continuous the fighting around Pokrovsk has become. It's not a front line in the traditional sense so much as a constantly shifting mosaic of small strongpoints, foxholes, and improvised defensive positions. Each one a potential target and each one requiring its own separate engagement to neutralize.